Welcome to Midnight Sleep Chronicles. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Take a deep breath with me. Just breathe. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw relax. Let everything that happened today begin to fade into the background. Tonight, we're going on a journey. Not through space, but through time, through mystery, through one of humanity's most enduring questions. We're searching for something that may never have existed, or perhaps existed so completely, so magnificently, that its loss echoes through millennia. We're searching for Atlantis. That name alone conjures images, doesn't it? A gleaming city rising from the sea, marble columns catching the sunlight, advanced technology beyond imagining, a civilization so perfect, so powerful that the gods themselves grew jealous. And in a single day and night, it vanished, swallowed by the ocean, lost forever. But what if I told you that Atlantis is more than just a story? That beneath the legends and the myths, there might be something real? Or that even if it never existed as Plato described it, the search for Atlantis has shaped how we understand our past, our present, and what we're capable of becoming? You'll discover why this story, told over 2,000 years ago, still captivates us. Why explorers have searched every ocean. Why scientists continue to dive into ancient ruins. Why the idea of a lost perfect civilization refuses to die. Before we begin, I'd love it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps. And I'm always curious. Have you ever felt drawn to the mystery of Atlantis? What do you think happened to it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's begin our descent into deep waters, into deep time, into the question that has haunted humanity for over 2 millennia. Where is Atlantis? And more importantly, why do we need it to exist? Breathe. Settle. Let go. Let's dive beneath the waves. Act 1. Reality. The search for the lost civilization. Close your eyes and imagine you're standing in ancient Athens. The year is 360 BCE. The sun is warm on your skin. You can hear the murmur of conversation in the agora, the marketplace where citizens gather to discuss philosophy, politics, and the nature of existence itself. In one corner, a crowd has gathered around an older man. His name is Plato. He's already famous as a philosopher, a student of Socrates, a seeker of truth. And today, he's telling a story that will echo through the centuries, a story that will launch 1,000 expeditions and inspire countless dreams. He's telling the story of Atlantis. The original account. Let's be clear from the beginning. Everything we know about Atlantis, every single detail, comes from one source. 2 dialogues written by Plato. That's it. There are no other ancient sources, no archaeological evidence, no contemporary accounts. Just Plato. In his dialogue called Timaeus and its sequel Critias, Plato describes a conversation between Socrates and several other men. One of them, Critias, shares a story passed down through his family. A story that supposedly came from Solon, the great Athenian lawmaker, who heard it from Egyptian priests during his travels. The story goes like this. 9,000 years before Solon's time, so roughly 11,000 years ago from our perspective, there existed a mighty island nation beyond the Pillars of Hercules. We know these pillars today as the Strait of Gibraltar, the gateway between the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. This island was larger than Libya and Asia combined. At least, that's how Plato describes it. The exact size is debated, but the point is clear. This was a massive landmass, a continent unto itself. The island was called Atlantis, and it was paradise. Plato describes it in extraordinary detail. The island had a large central plain, surrounded by mountains that protected it from harsh northern winds. The plain was rich and fertile, producing abundant crops twice per year. Springs of both hot and cold water flowed from the earth. Minerals of all kinds could be found in the mountains, including a mysterious metal called orichalcum that gleamed with a reddish-gold light. At the very center of the island stood the magnificent capital city, also called Atlantis. The city was built in concentric circles, rings of land alternating with rings of water. Massive walls surrounded each ring. The outermost wall was coated with brass, the middle wall with tin, and the innermost wall with orichalcum, that mysterious metal that shone with a fiery light. At the very center, on a small island hill founds, stood the royal palace and the temple of Poseidon. The temple was enormous, over 600 feet long and 300 feet wide. Its exterior was covered in silver, its pinnacles in gold. Inside stood a massive statue of Poseidon himself, driving 6 winged horses, so tall his head nearly touched the ceiling. The Atlanteans had carved a great canal from the sea to the outermost ring of water, allowing ships to sail directly into the heart of the city. They had built bridges connecting the rings of land. They had constructed tunnels for ships to pass from one ring to another. They had enormous harbors filled with vessels. They had bathhouses and gymnasiums and gardens. They had a sophisticated government based on law and justice. They had armies and navies unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. And they had power. Enormous power. The Atlanteans had conquered much of the Mediterranean region. They controlled Libya as far as Egypt and Europe, as far as Tyrrhenia, which we now call Italy. They were, in Plato's description, the most advanced civilization the world had ever known. But then, something happened. Something terrible. The Atlanteans grew proud, arrogant. They began to value conquest over wisdom, material wealth over spiritual virtue. They launched an invasion of Athens and Egypt, attempting to enslave the entire Mediterranean world. Athens, tiny Athens, so small compared to the Atlantean Empire, stood alone against them. And through courage and virtue, Athens defeated them, drove them back, showed that justice could triumph over might. But the gods were not finished with Atlantis. Zeus called together all the gods. He declared that Atlantis must be punished for its hubris, its overreaching pride. And the punishment was absolute. In a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis was destroyed. Earthquakes and floods of extraordinary violence. The entire island sank beneath the waves. Every person drowned. Every building collapsed into the sea. The greatest civilization the world had ever known simply vanished. And the sea above where Atlantis had been became unnavigable, filled with mud and shallow water. A warning to future generations. This is Plato's account. This is the story that has captivated humanity for over 2,000 years. But here's the question that matters. The question that has launched careers and expeditions and endless debates. Was Plato describing something real? Or was he making it all up? Plato's purpose. Before we dive into the search for a real Atlantis, we need to understand something crucial about Plato. He was a philosopher, a teacher. Everything he wrote had a purpose, a lesson. Most scholars who study Plato believe that Atlantis was a philosophical allegory, a cautionary tale, a thought experiment designed to illustrate political and moral principles. Think about the context. Plato lived in Athens during a tumultuous time. Athens had just lost the Peloponnesian War to Sparta. The golden age of Athenian democracy was over. The city was in decline. Political corruption was rampant. The man Plato loved most, his teacher Socrates, had been executed by the democratic government for supposedly corrupting the youth. Plato was disillusioned. He believed that societies inevitably decline, that they start with wisdom and virtue, but gradually become corrupted by wealth and power, that they fall into tyranny and chaos. Atlantis fits this pattern perfectly. It begins as an ideal society, advanced, just, powerful. But it grows corrupt, loses its virtue, and is destroyed. The story serves as a warning, a mirror held up to Athens, to any civilization. This is what happens when you abandon wisdom for wealth, when you pursue power without justice, when you forget the values that made you great. In this reading, Atlantis never existed. It was fiction from the beginning, a philosophical parable dressed up as history to make it more compelling. Many scholars stop here. Case closed. Atlantis was Plato's invention. End of story. But not everyone agrees. Because there are curious details in Plato's account. Specific details. Geographic details. Details that seem oddly precise for something completely made up. And throughout history, people have wondered, what if there's a kernel of truth? What if Plato took a real historical event, some actual disaster, some real civilization, and embellished it, exaggerated it, used it as the basis for his philosophical tale? This is where the search begins. The scientific search lets fast forward through the centuries, past the Roman Empire, which largely dismissed Atlantis as fiction, past the Middle Ages, when the story was mostly forgotten, to the Renaissance, when European explorers began sailing west into the Atlantic Ocean. When Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492, some people wondered if he might find Atlantis. After all, Plato said it was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, in the Atlantic Ocean. Columbus was sailing exactly there. He didn't find Atlantis, of course. He found the Americas. But this discovery sparked new theories. Maybe Atlantis wasn't in the Atlantic Ocean at all. Maybe it was the Americas. Maybe the indigenous civilizations, the Aztecs, the Maya, the Inca, were descendants of Atlanteans. This theory became popular in the 19th century. Writers and pseudoscientists created elaborate mythologies connecting Atlantis to every advanced ancient civilization. They saw Atlantean influence in the pyramids of Egypt, the megaliths of Britain, the temples of Mexico. But these theories had a problem, a big problem. They required Atlantis to be far more ancient than Plato described. And they ignored the actual evidence of how these civilizations developed independently over thousands of years. Serious archaeologists and historians dismissed these romantic notions. But they couldn't dismiss the question entirely, because there was another possibility, one that made much more sense. What if Atlantis wasn't in the Atlantic Ocean at all? What if Plato, or his sources, got the location wrong? What if there was a real Bronze Age civilization that was destroyed by a natural disaster? And what if that real event became the basis for the Atlantis legend? The Minoan connection. In the early 20th century, archaeologists made a remarkable discovery. On the island of Crete in the Mediterranean Sea, they uncovered the ruins of an advanced Bronze Age civilization. They called it the Minoan civilization, after the legendary King Minos. The Minoans flourished from roughly 3000 to 1200 BCE. They built enormous palace complexes at Knossos, Phaistos, and other sites. These weren't just palaces. They were sophisticated urban centers with advanced architecture, indoor plumbing, multiple stories, elaborate frescoes. The Minoans had a complex writing system. They traded across the Mediterranean. They had a powerful navy. They influenced and possibly dominated the Aegean region for centuries. And then, around 1600 BCE, something catastrophic happened. About 70 miles north of Crete lies a small island called Santorini. The Greeks called it Thera. It looks like a crescent moon today, surrounding a deep blue lagoon. Beautiful, peaceful, tourist destination. But Santorini wasn't always so small or so peaceful. 3,600 years ago, Santorini was a much larger, circular island, and at its center was a volcano. Not just any volcano, one of the most powerful volcanoes in human history. Around 1600 BCE, Thera erupted. The explosion was cataclysmic, more powerful than Krakatoa, more powerful than Mount St. Helens. The eruption blew apart the entire center of the island, leaving only the crescent-shaped remnants we see today. The explosion generated massive tsunamis, waves hundreds of feet high that raced across the Mediterranean. These tsunamis struck Crete with devastating force. Coastal cities were destroyed. The Minoan palaces were damaged. The civilization was severely weakened. Within a few centuries, the Minoan civilization collapsed. The palace at Knossos was abandoned. Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland took control of Crete. The Minoan culture vanished into history. When archaeologists excavated Santorini, they found something remarkable. Buried under layers of volcanic ash, perfectly preserved, was an entire Bronze Age city. They called it Akrotiri. Akrotiri was sophisticated, multi-story buildings, advanced plumbing, beautiful frescoes showing dolphins, flowers, elaborate scenes of daily life. The city had been evacuated before the eruption. No bodies were found, but everything else was preserved like Pompeii. The similarities to Plato's Atlantis were striking. An advanced island civilization, a circular island, destruction by earthquake and flood, disappearance beneath the sea. At least, the center of Thera literally did sink beneath the sea when the caldera collapsed. Many scholars became convinced. This was it. This was the real Atlantis. Plato or his sources had heard about the Thera eruption and the Minoan civilization. The story got passed down for over 1,000 years, growing and changing in the telling. By the time Plato wrote it down, the details had been exaggerated, the timeline extended, the location moved. But the core was real. A real civilization, a real disaster. This theory is compelling. It's the most widely accepted scientific explanation for the Atlantis legend. If Atlantis has any basis in historical reality, this is probably it. But there are problems. First, the timeline doesn't match. Plato specifically says Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years before Solon's time. That would be 11,000 years ago. The Thera eruption happened only 3,600 years ago. That's a huge discrepancy. Some scholars argue that there was a transcription error, that the Egyptian priests told Solon 900 years, and it became 9,000 in translation, but that's speculation. We have no evidence for it. Second, the location doesn't match. Plato is very clear that Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, outside the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic Ocean. Santorini is firmly inside the Mediterranean. It's not even close to the Pillars of Hercules. Third, the size doesn't match. Plato describes Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia combined. Santorini, even before the eruption, was tiny, a small island. Nothing like the massive continent Plato describes. You can argue that these are exaggerations, that the story grew in the telling. But at some point, you're changing so much of Plato's account that you're not really talking about his Atlantis anymore. You're talking about a different story that vaguely resembles it. So while the Minoan theory is plausible, it's not proven, and it leaves many questions unanswered. Other theories. The Minoan connection isn't the only scientific theory. Over the years, dozens of locations have been proposed as the real Atlantis. Some researchers point to underwater structures near the Bahamas or Cuba, claiming they're remnants of Atlantean buildings. These have been thoroughly investigated and debunked. They're natural geological formations, not ancient architecture. Others suggest that Atlantis was in the Black Sea region, flooded when the Mediterranean broke through and filled the basin around 7,500 years ago. This event did happen and was catastrophic for coastal settlements. But again, the timeline and details don't match Plato's description. Some propose locations in Antarctica, arguing that ancient maps show Antarctica without ice, suggesting an advanced civilization existed there before it froze. These theories require rewriting almost everything we know about climate history and are not taken seriously by mainstream science. The problem with all these theories is the same. They start with the assumption that Atlantis must have existed. Then they search for anything, any ancient ruin, any underwater feature, any catastrophic flood that might fit. And they twist Plato's description to match. This is working backward. This is seeing what you want to see. The scientific consensus remains clear. If there's any truth to the Atlantis story, it's probably a distant memory of Bronze Age civilizations like the Minoans, filtered through centuries of oral tradition and shaped by Plato's philosophical purposes. But most likely, Atlantis never existed at all. It was Plato's creation from the beginning, a powerful thought experiment, a cautionary tale about the rise and fall of civilizations. And yet the search continues. New expeditions, new technologies, new theories. Because we can't seem to let it go. Why? Why does this story have such a grip on our imagination? The persistence of the mystery. Here's what's fascinating. Even if we accept that Atlantis was probably fiction, that doesn't diminish the story's power. In fact, it might enhance it. Atlantis represents something universal, something that resonates across cultures and centuries. The idea of a lost golden age, a time when things were better, when humanity had achieved something magnificent, and then lost it. Every culture has these stories. Eden, Shangri-La, Avalon, the Age of Heroes, a paradise in the past, a perfection we've fallen from. These stories serve psychological and cultural purposes. They give us something to aspire to, a vision of what humanity could be. They suggest that we've done it before, so we could do it again. They also provide comfort in dark times, when civilization seems to be crumbling, when everything feels like it's falling apart. We can tell ourselves, we've been here before. We've fallen from grace before, and we survived. We rebuilt. We might even rise higher than before. Atlantis is also a convenient explanation for mysteries we don't understand. Ancient, megalithic structures that seem impossibly sophisticated for their time must have been Atlantean knowledge. Similarities between distant cultures must have been a common Atlantean source. This is intellectually lazy, of course. It ignores the real evidence of how cultures develop and spread ideas. But it satisfies a need for simple answers, for grand narratives that tie everything together. And perhaps most importantly, Atlantis represents hope. Hope that there's more to discover, more to learn, that beneath the ocean, beneath the earth, great secrets are still waiting. That the story of humanity is longer and stranger and more magnificent than we know. This hope drives exploration, drives research, drives the imagination. And that's valuable, even if Atlantis itself is fiction. What we actually know. So let's summarize what we can say with confidence about Atlantis based on actual evidence. 1. The only ancient source for Atlantis is Plato. No other Greek or Roman writer describes it independently. Later writers who mention it are all referring back to Plato. 2. Plato was writing philosophy, not history. His works are full of allegories and thought experiments. The Atlantis story appears in dialogues that are explicitly about ideal societies and moral decline. 3. Many of the details Plato provides are impossible or extremely improbable. An island larger than Libya and Asia combined that completely vanished, leaving no trace? A civilization that existed 9,000 years before his time, with advanced technology, when humans everywhere else were hunter-gatherers or early farmers. These don't match what we know about history and geology. 4. There's no archaeological evidence. None. We've explored the ocean floor extensively. We've studied ancient ruins around the world. If a civilization as advanced as Plato describes had existed, we'd have found traces of it. Metal tools, pottery, writing, architecture. Something. There's nothing. 5. However, ancient civilizations were destroyed by natural disasters. This happened repeatedly throughout history. The Minoans, the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, ancient settlements along coastlines that were flooded. It's possible, even probable, that stories of these real disasters influence the Atlantis legend. 6. The human need for Golden Age myths is universal and powerful. Atlantis fills that need perfectly. It gives us a vision of lost perfection and a warning about pride and decline. So the reasonable conclusion is this: Atlantis, as Plato described it, a vast island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules, destroyed 9,000 years before his time, never existed. It was a philosophical invention, but the story may have been inspired by real events. Distant memories of Bronze Age civilizations destroyed by earthquakes and tsunamis. These memories, passed down through generations, were transformed and embellished until they became the legend Plato recorded. And that legend, whether true or false, has taken on a life of its own. It has become real in the sense that it shapes how we think, how we imagine, how we understand the past and envision the future. This is the power of story. This is why Atlantis matters, even if it never existed. Now let's shift perspective. Let's move from what we can prove to what we imagine. From the scientific search to the legendary embellishments. From reality to the realm where Atlantis truly lives. In story, in myth, in the collective imagination of humanity. Take a breath. Let your mind drift. We're leaving the world of facts and entering the world of legends. Act 2. Legends. The many faces of Atlantis. The story of Atlantis didn't end with Plato. In fact, in many ways, it had only just begun. Over the centuries, the legend grew, expanded, took on new meanings. Different cultures adopted it, adapted it, wove it into their own mythologies. What Plato created as philosophy became something else entirely. It became a legend. And legends have their own truth, separate from historical fact. The medieval silence and Renaissance revival. For over 1,000 years after Plato, Atlantis faded into obscurity. The Roman historians mentioned it occasionally, but usually just to note that Plato made it up. Saint Augustine, the Christian theologian, dismissed it as fiction. During the medieval period, European scholars focused on biblical history and the works of Aristotle. Plato's dialogues were less influential. Atlantis was largely forgotten. But then came the Renaissance, a rebirth of interest in classical learning. Scholars rediscovered Plato's works. They read them with fresh eyes, and they found themselves captivated by the Atlantis story The timing was perfect. This was the age of exploration. Columbus had sailed west and found entire continents that Europeans hadn't known existed. If whole continents could be hidden across the ocean, why not Atlantis? The Renaissance was also a time of utopian thinking. Writers like Thomas More and Francis Bacon imagined ideal societies. They were inspired by Plato's Republic and by the description of Atlantis before its fall. They dreamed of creating new Atlantises, perfect societies built on reason and virtue. Francis Bacon wrote The New Atlantis in 1626. It describes a fictional island called Benzalem in the Pacific Ocean, inhabited by a highly advanced and virtuous Christian society. The people of Benzalem have scientific knowledge far beyond Europe. They have institutions dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, a vision of what would later become the Royal Society. Bacon never explicitly says Benzalem is Atlantis, but the connection is clear. He's reimagining Plato's story for his own time, using it to express his vision of what human society could become through the application of scientific method and moral virtue. This became a pattern. Writers would take the Atlantis framework, an advanced, lost civilization, and use it to explore their own ideas about society, progress, and human nature. The 19th century, Atlantis mania. The 19th century saw an explosion of interest in Atlantis. This was the great age of archaeology. Heinrich Schliemann excavated Troy, proving that Homer's legendary city was real. Howard Carter would soon discover King Tut's tomb. Ancient civilizations were being unearthed, their wonders revealed. If Troy was real, if the stories of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia were based on historical fact, why not Atlantis? The most influential book of this era was Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, by Ignatius Donnelly, published in 1882. Donnelly was an American politician and amateur archaeologist. He believed passionately that Atlantis had existed exactly as Plato described. Donnelly's book wove together mythology, archaeology, geology, and wild speculation into a grand narrative. He argued that Atlantis had been the cradle of civilization, that Atlantean survivors had fled to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Central America after the disaster. That all the great ancient civilizations, Egyptian, Sumerian, Mayan, were founded by Atlantean refugees. According to Donnelly, this explained all the similarities between ancient cultures. Why both Egyptians and Mayans built pyramids. Why flood myths appear in cultures worldwide. Why ancient peoples across the globe had similar technologies and symbols. It was all because of Atlantis, a single-source civilization that had spread knowledge around the world before its destruction. Donnelly's theory was compelling, dramatic, romantic. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies and remained in print for decades. It convinced millions of people that Atlantis was real. There was just one problem. It was almost entirely wrong. The similarities between ancient cultures that Donnelly pointed to have been thoroughly explained by archaeology and anthropology. Cultures develop similar technologies independently because humans everywhere face similar challenges. Pyramids are a stable structure that can be built with primitive tools. Of course, many cultures independently invented them. Flood myths are common because floods are common. Every river valley civilization experienced catastrophic floods. People told stories about them. This doesn't require a single historical event or a shared Atlantean origin. The archaeological evidence doesn't support Donnelly's timeline. The Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Mesoamerican civilizations developed independently over thousands of years. We can trace their evolution in the archaeological record. There's no sudden appearance of advanced knowledge from outside. But facts didn't stop Donnelly's influence. His book shaped how people thought about Atlantis for generations. It transformed Atlantis from a philosophical allegory into a historical hypothesis. And it opened the door for even wilder theories. The occult connection. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Atlantis became deeply intertwined with occultism and esoteric spirituality. The most influential figure was Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society. In her massive work, The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, Blavatsky presented an elaborate mythology of human evolution that placed Atlantis center stage. According to Blavatsky, humanity has gone through several root races, stages of physical and spiritual evolution. The Atlanteans were the fourth root race. They were giants, far more advanced than modern humans in psychic and spiritual abilities. They had technology beyond our understanding, powered by mental energy, by will, by occult forces. But the Atlanteans became corrupt. They misused their powers. They practiced black magic. They fell into materialism and selfishness. So the masters, enlightened beings who guide human evolution, decided they had to be destroyed. A pole shift occurred. Catastrophic floods swept the earth. Atlantis sank beneath the waves. Only a few spiritually advanced Atlanteans survived. They fled to various parts of the world, becoming the founders of mystery schools and secret societies that preserved ancient wisdom. Blavatsky claimed to have learned all this from ancient Tibetan texts and through psychic communication with the masters. She provided no evidence, of course, but her teachings influenced countless people, including many who went on to develop their own spiritual systems. The most famous was Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. From the 1920s to the 1940s, Cayce gave thousands of psychic readings while in a trance state. Hundreds of these readings mentioned Atlantis. Cayce's Atlantis was even more fantastical than Blavatsky's. According to him, Atlantean civilization existed for over 200,000 years. They had aircraft, they had death rays, they had genetic engineering and could create human-animal hybrids. They had enormous crystals that generated unlimited energy. The Atlanteans became divided into two groups. The children of the Law of One, who used technology for spiritual purposes and served others, and the sons of Belial, who pursued power and pleasure and exploited others. The conflict between these groups eventually led to disaster. The sons of Belial misused the power crystals. This triggered earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Atlantis broke apart over a series of cataclysms, finally sinking completely around 10,000 BCE. Cayce claimed that many souls alive today are reincarnated Atlanteans, that we carry memories of Atlantis in our unconscious minds, that certain places, especially the area near Bimini in the Bahamas, still hold Atlantean ruins that would soon be discovered. In 1968, shortly after Cayce had predicted, underwater formations were discovered near Bimini. They looked like walls or roads. Many of Cayce's followers believed this proved his visions were true. Geologists investigated. The formations are natural, beach rock layers of limestone that naturally crack into rectangular patterns. Not human-made, not Atlantean ruins, just rocks. But for believers, the mystery remains. The search continues. Atlantis in popular culture. By the mid-20th century, Atlantis had thoroughly permeated popular culture. It appeared in science fiction, fantasy, comic books, films, and television shows. In 1954, Disney released 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, featuring a dramatic scene where Captain Nemo's submarine discovers the ruins of Atlantis on the ocean floor. The image was powerful. Crumbling columns, fallen statues, ancient grandeur reclaimed by the sea. Comic books embraced Atlantis enthusiastically. DC Comics made Aquaman the king of Atlantis, an underwater civilization that still existed beneath the waves, populated by mere people with the ability to breathe water and communicate with sea life. Marvel Comics created Namor the Submariner, Prince of Atlantis, predating Aquaman by a few years. These comic book Atlantises were explicitly fictional, but they shaped how generations of readers imagined the lost civilization. Advanced but isolated, powerful but hidden, connected to the ocean, to magic, to mystery. In 2001, Disney released an animated film simply called Atlantis, the Lost Empire. It portrayed Atlantis as existing deep underwater, its inhabitants descended from the original Atlanteans, kept alive for thousands of years by a magical power crystal. The film combined elements from various Atlantis theories: Plato's circular city, Donnelly's refugee survivors, Cayce's crystals, pulp adventure aesthetics. It was a love letter to the legend, even as it took enormous creative liberties. Television shows have featured Atlantis repeatedly. Stargate Atlantis reimagined the lost city as an ancient space station built by advanced aliens, now located in another galaxy. Man from Atlantis in the 70s featured a man with gills and superhuman abilities, last survivor of Atlantis. Countless documentaries have explored the search for the real Atlantis, mixing genuine archaeology with speculation and wishful thinking. Video games have explored Atlantis. Tomb Raider, Assassin's Creed, Age of Mythology, all have featured Atlantean levels or storylines. Players explore sunken ruins, discover ancient technologies, battle threats from the lost civilization. This constant recycling and reimagining of the Atlantis story has created something interesting: a feedback loop. Each new version adds to the cultural understanding of what Atlantis means, what it looks like, what it represents. These additions influence the next iteration. So when someone today thinks of Atlantis, they're not just thinking of Plato's description. They're thinking of an accumulated mythology drawn from 2,000 years of retellings. Crystal power sources, psychic abilities, mere people, advanced aircraft, gleaming spires beneath the waves, mysterious ruins waiting to be discovered. Plato's Atlantis has become our Atlantis, a shared cultural mythology, a collective dream. The modern New Age movement Atlantis remains central to many New Age belief systems. Spiritual teachers speak of Atlantean lifetimes. Crystal healers claim their practices descend from Atlantean wisdom. Channelers claim to receive messages from Atlantean spirits or extraterrestrials who interacted with Atlantis. According to these modern myths, Atlantis was a spiritually advanced civilization where humans lived in harmony with higher dimensional beings. People had psychic abilities as naturally as we have sight and hearing. They could levitate objects, telepathically communicate, heal with energy, travel through astral planes. But humanity's spiritual evolution was interrupted. Some say by the misuse of technology. Others say by interference from negative extraterrestrials. Others say by our own greed and materialism. Whatever the cause, the result was catastrophe. The destruction of Atlantis was a fall from grace. Humanity plunged into spiritual darkness. We forgot our true nature, forgot our abilities, became trapped in material consciousness. But the knowledge wasn't entirely lost. It survived in mystery schools, in ancient Egypt, in India, in Peru. The pyramids, the megalithic structures, the sacred sites. These were built by Atlantean survivors or according to Atlantean principles. And now, according to New Age teachings, we're approaching a time of awakening. The Atlantean knowledge is returning. We're rediscovering our abilities, raising our consciousness. preparing for a new golden age. In this view, Atlantis is not just history, it's prophecy, a vision of what we once were and what we will become again. These beliefs can't be proven or disproven by archaeology or history. They exist in the realm of faith, not fact. But they serve important psychological functions for believers. They provide meaning, hope, a sense of connection to something larger than themselves. Why we keep telling the story. So why does the Atlantis legend persist? Why, despite zero archaeological evidence, do people continue to believe it was real? Why do new books, documentaries, and theories appear every year? Several reasons. First, the legend fills a psychological need. Humans crave golden ages. We believe things were once better. This gives us hope that they can be better again. Atlantis embodies that hope. Second, the legend provides simple explanations for complex questions. Why do ancient structures seem impossibly sophisticated? Atlantis. Why do cultures share similar myths? Atlantis. Why can't we rediscover certain ancient knowledge? It was lost with Atlantis. These explanations are almost always wrong. Real archaeology provides better, evidence-based answers. But the Atlantis explanation is easier to grasp, more romantic, more satisfying emotionally, if not intellectually. Third, the legend connects us to mystery, to the unknown. Modern life can feel fully mapped, fully explained. We know where everything is. We've explored every continent, photographed every landscape. But the ocean depths remain mysterious. And if Atlantis is down there somewhere, then there's still wonder in the world. Still secrets waiting. Still adventures to be had. Fourth, the legend allows for rebellion against mainstream narratives. Believing in Atlantis can be a way of saying, the experts don't know everything. The official story is incomplete. I have access to hidden knowledge. This impulse can lead to genuine questioning of assumptions, which is valuable. But it can also lead to rejecting all expert knowledge, embracing conspiracy theories, and living in an alternate reality untethered from evidence. Finally, and most importantly, the Atlantis legend endures because it's a great story. And humans are storytelling creatures. We're drawn to narratives that resonate emotionally, that speak to our hopes and fears, that provide structure and meaning to existence. Atlantis works as story. It has everything: a magnificent civilization, hubris, divine punishment, catastrophic destruction, survivors fleeing to rebuild, hidden knowledge waiting to be rediscovered. It's archetypal, universal. It touches something deep in the human psyche. So we keep telling it. We keep adapting it. We keep searching for it. Not because we'll necessarily find physical ruins, but because the search itself is meaningful. The story itself matters. And this brings us to the deepest level. Beyond history, beyond legend, into pure mythology. Into the realm where Atlantis reveals timeless truths about human nature, about civilization, about the eternal patterns that repeat across cultures and centuries. Take a breath. Let your mind drift deeper. We're moving from the particular to the universal. From the story of one civilization to the stories all civilizations tell themselves. Act 3. Mythology, what Atlantis reveals about humanity. We've explored what history tells us about Atlantis. We've explored the legends that grew around it. Now let's explore what Atlantis means at the deepest level. What it reveals about who we are, what we fear, what we desire, what patterns repeat throughout human existence. Because Atlantis is more than a story about one civilization. It's a mirror. And what we see in that mirror is ourselves. The archetype of the fall. At its core, the Atlantis story follows an ancient pattern. a pattern that appears in virtually every culture and every era. The pattern of paradise lost. In the beginning, there was perfection, harmony, abundance, knowledge, power. Everything was as it should be. The golden age, the garden. But humanity became corrupted. Pride entered, greed entered, selfishness entered. We reached too far, claimed too much, forgot our place. Then paradise was taken away. We were cast out, exiled, punished. The Kurham gates closed behind us. We can never return. This is the pattern of Eden. Adam and Eve in the garden, living in harmony with God and nature. They had everything they needed, but they wanted more. They ate from the tree of knowledge, and they were expelled. The cherubim with flaming swords guard the way back. Paradise is lost forever. This is the pattern of Prometheus, the titan who gave fire to humanity, elevating us above animals. Zeus punished him for this gift, chaining him to a rock where an eagle ate his liver daily for eternity. Humanity received divine knowledge and paid a terrible price. This is the pattern of Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun on wings his father built. The wax melted. He fell. He drowned. Ambition leads to destruction when we forget our limits. This is the pattern of the Tower of Babel. Humanity united, building a tower to reach heaven. God confused their languages, scattered them across the earth. We cannot storm heaven. We cannot make ourselves equal to God. And this is the pattern of Atlantis, a civilization that achieved greatness, then overreached, that grew proud, corrupt, materialistic, that forgot justice in pursuit of conquest, that was utterly destroyed as punishment. The details vary. The core remains the same. We had something precious. We lost it through our own fault. We can never get it back. Why does this pattern appear everywhere? Why do cultures across the world, separated by oceans and millennia, tell variations of the same story? Because it reflects a fundamental truth about human consciousness. We are aware of imperfection. We suffer. We struggle. We know things could be better. And we sense, we intuit, that maybe they once were better. Or at least, that some better state is possible. This creates a longing, a nostalgia for something we've never actually experienced, a grief for a paradise we've never actually lost, because it never actually existed, except in imagination, a myth, in the space between what is and what could be. Psychologists call this the golden age fallacy, the tendency to believe the past was better than the present, that previous generations were wiser, more virtuous, more in harmony with nature and with themselves. This belief is almost always wrong. By every measurable metric, health, lifespan, violence, poverty, freedom, most people today live better than their ancestors did. The past was brutal, difficult, short. We romanticize it because we don't have to live through it. But the fallacy persists because it serves a purpose. It gives us something to strive toward. If things were once better, they can be better again. We can reclaim what was lost. We can build a new Atlantis. The fall gives meaning to the present. Our suffering isn't meaningless. It's a consequence. A punishment, yes, but also a lesson. We fell because we did something wrong. If we can understand what we did wrong, we can avoid repeating it. We can chart a different course. This is why Atlantis matters as mythology. It's not about whether a specific island sank in the Atlantic. It's about the pattern, the cycle of rise and fall, the warning that all civilizations carry within them the seeds of their own destruction. Hubris and nemesis. The Greeks had a concept for this. Hubris, excessive pride, overreaching, claiming more than you deserve, forgetting you're mortal. Hubris was the gravest sin in Greek thought. Worse than violence, worse than theft, because hubris threatens the cosmic order. It's an assault on the fundamental structure of reality. The gods gave humans their place, a good place, better than animals, blessed with reason, creativity, the ability to shape the world, but still limited, still mortal, still subject to fate and death. Hubris is forgetting those limits, thinking yourself equal to the gods, thinking you can transcend your nature, thinking the rules don't apply to you. And hubris always brings nemesis, retribution. The gods will not tolerate it. They will strike you down. The higher you've risen in your pride, the farther you fall. This isn't just mythology, it's observation. Again and again throughout history, civilizations rise to greatness. They become powerful, wealthy, sophisticated. And at the peak of their power, they begin to believe they're invincible, special, chosen, exempt from the forces that destroyed previous civilizations. They overextend, overreach, pursue conquest without wisdom, value wealth over virtue, prioritize short-term gain over long-term sustainability, ignore warnings, dismiss critics, forge ahead with confidence, and they fall. Collapsed by internal contradictions, defeated by external enemies they underestimated, destroyed by the very strengths that made them great when those strengths become corrupted. Rome thought it was eternal. The 1,000-year Reich believed it would last 1,000 years. Empires always believe they're permanent, and empires always fall. Atlantis is this pattern distilled into pure myth, a civilization that achieved everything, built everything, controlled everything, and precisely because it had everything, it wanted more. It launched invasions, pursued empire, forgot justice, and the gods said, "Enough, you've gone too far." And in a day and a night, obliteration, total, complete, as if you never existed. The lesson is clear. No matter how powerful you become, you cannot escape the fundamental laws of existence. Pride comes before destruction. Injustice brings retribution. Nothing lasts forever. This lesson applies to individuals as well as civilizations. We all face the temptation of hubris, to think we're smarter than we are, to take more than our share, to ignore the impact of our actions on others, to believe the rules apply to everyone except us. And we all face nemesis when we succumb to that temptation. Sometimes dramatically, sometimes subtly. But reality reasserts itself. The consequences come. The Atlantis myth reminds us, you are not special. You are not exempt. No matter how great you become, you remain subject to the same forces that govern all existence. Forget this, and you will be reminded, painfully. The nostalgia for lost perfection. But there's another aspect to the Atlantis myth. It's not just about hubris and punishment. It's also about loss, about grief, about the ache of nostalgia. Atlantis was magnificent, advanced, sophisticated, beautiful. The description in Plato evokes wonder. The concentric rings of water and land, the temples shining with precious metals, the sophistication of the architecture and engineering, the power of the navy, the virtue of the early Atlanteans. There's a deep longing in the story, a sense that something precious was lost, something we'll never see again. The golden age has passed. We're living in a diminished age. We're lesser than what came before. This longing appears constantly in human culture. The Hebrew Bible speaks of the days of Noah, when people lived for hundreds of years. Hindu texts describe the Satya Yuga, the golden age when humans lived in perfect harmony and righteousness for thousands of years. Greek myth speaks of the golden age under Chronos, when the earth gave food without labor and humans lived like gods. All of these are expressions of the same desire. The wish that somewhere, somewhen, things were perfect. And the grief that we've lost that perfection. Carl Jung wrote about this as the archetype of paradise. It exists in the collective unconscious, not as a memory of an actual place or time, but as a symbol, a representation of wholeness. Integration. The state before consciousness split itself into subject and object, self and other, good and evil. Paradise is the state before the fall, before self-awareness brought suffering, before knowledge brought moral responsibility. It's the innocence we can never reclaim, because to be conscious is to have already lost it. The yearning for Atlantis is the yearning for this lost wholeness. For a time when things made sense, when power was used justly, when knowledge brought wisdom, when society was harmonious, when we lived in balance with nature and with ourselves. We project this yearning onto the past. The past becomes golden, becomes perfect, becomes paradise. Not because it actually was those things, but because we need it to have been. We need to believe perfection is possible, that we've achieved it once, that we could achieve it again. This is why every generation thinks the previous generation was better. Why older people remember their youth as a better time. Why ancient writers praised ancient days even more ancient than their own. It's not accurate. It's archetypal. It's the human heart's cry for home, for belonging, for wholeness, for meaning. Atlantis gives form to that cry, makes it concrete, gives it a name and a place and a story. The longing becomes legend. The legend becomes search. And the search itself, even if it never finds the thing sought, provides meaning. The warning to civilizations. Let's return to Plato's original purpose. He wasn't writing fantasy. He was writing philosophy, political philosophy. And the Atlantis story was a warning to his own society. Athens, think about what you're becoming. Think about the path you're on. You were once great. You defeated the Persian Empire. You built the Parthenon. You created democracy. You produced Socrates, Pericles, Sophocles. But you're corrupt now. You lost the Peloponnesian War because of arrogance and poor decisions. You executed Socrates. Your democracy has become mob rule. You care more about wealth and power than wisdom and virtue. You're becoming Atlantis. You're repeating the pattern. And if you don't change course, you'll meet the same fate. This warning is timeless. Every civilization needs to hear it. Every civilization is tempted to believe it's special, eternal, beyond the forces that destroyed previous civilizations. And every civilization is wrong about that. The forces that destroyed previous civilizations, internal decay, external threat, environmental change, technological disruption. These forces don't disappear. They adapt, they return, they find new forms. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The specific details change. The underlying patterns remain constant. Civilizations rise when they solve problems, when they create systems that provide security, prosperity, justice, when they align incentive structures so that individual self-interest serves collective good, when they maintain institutions that constrain the powerful and protect the weak. Civilizations fall when those systems decay, when elites pursue their own interest at the expense of the common good, when institutions become corrupted, when inequality grows so extreme that social cohesion breaks down, when environmental or economic stress exposes underlying fragility. And civilizations almost always decay in the same way, gradually at first, so gradually that people don't notice. Things that were unthinkable become thinkable, then acceptable, then normal, then celebrated. Standards erode, norms shift. The center doesn't hold, and then suddenly, Crisis, collapse. Everything that seemed permanent reveals itself as temporary. Everything that seemed solid dissolves. The Atlantis myth captures this. One day and one night. That's how long it took. After centuries of existence, destruction came suddenly. Completely. But the reality is, the destruction began long before. It began when the Atlanteans started valuing conquest over justice. When they began pursuing empire. When they forgot the principles that made them great. The physical destruction was quick, but the moral decay was gradual. Imperceptible until too late. This is the warning. Watch for the signs. Question your assumptions. Remember your principles. Don't think you're exempt from the patterns. Don't assume your success is permanent. Civilizations survive by learning, by adapting, by recognizing threats, by reforming institutions before they break completely. Civilizations fall by forgetting, by assuming, by rigidity, by denying problems until they become catastrophic. Which kind of civilization will we be? This is always the question. And Atlantis is always the cautionary tale. The search for meaning. Here's something interesting about the Atlantis legend. Despite having no evidence that it was real, people continue searching for it, continue believing in it, continue drawing inspiration from it. This tells us something important about human nature. We need myths. We need legends. We need stories that give shape to our deepest concerns, our deepest longings, our deepest fears. Facts alone don't satisfy us. We need meaning. We need narrative. We need to understand our place in a larger story. Science can tell us how the world works, the mechanisms, the causes and effects. This is valuable, essential, but it doesn't, by itself, tell us what to do, how to live, what matters. For that, we need philosophy, ethics, religion, art, story. The domains that address meaning rather than mechanism. Atlantis exists in this domain. It doesn't matter, at least it doesn't matter most importantly, whether Plato's description was historically accurate. What matters is what the story means, what it teaches us, how it shapes how we think about ourselves and our civilization. The search for Atlantis is really a search for ourselves. Who are we? Where did we come from? What are we capable of? What should we be striving for? What should we be avoiding? These are the eternal questions. The questions every generation must answer anew. And the Atlantis myth provides a framework for exploring them. So when someone searches for underwater ruins, that might be Atlantis. They're not just searching for rocks. They're searching for proof that humanity can achieve greatness, that there's more to our story than we currently understand. That wonders are possible. When someone studies ancient civilizations looking for evidence of Atlantean influence, they're searching for connection, for patterns, for meaning in the sweep of history. When someone reads New Age books about Atlantean spirituality, they're searching for transcendence, for access to wisdom beyond the mundane, for hope that we're more than we appear to be. The search takes many forms, some scientific, some spiritual, some purely imaginative. But underneath, the impulse is the same, the need for meaning, the need for story, the need to locate ourselves in something larger than our individual lives. This is fundamentally human. This is how we've always been. And this is why Atlantis endures, why it will continue to endure, why it will keep being retold, reimagined, searched for, dreamed about, because we need it, not as history, as mythology, as mirror, as meaning. The eternal return. There's one final aspect of the Atlantis myth we should explore. The idea of return, of recovery, of rebuilding what was lost, Atlantis fell. But the story doesn't end there. Survivors escaped. They brought knowledge to other lands. They seeded new civilizations. The wisdom wasn't entirely lost. And maybe Atlantis itself will rise again. Maybe it's not gone forever. Maybe it's sleeping beneath the waves. Maybe one day, when humanity is ready, when we've learned the lessons, when we've evolved spiritually, the lost continent will emerge. Paradise will be regained. This is the hope buried in the heart of the legend. That fall is not final. That loss can be recovered. That we can go home again. It's the same hope in Christianity's second coming. In Buddhism's future, Buddha Maitreya. In the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world. In the new age belief in an approaching age of Aquarius. The golden age will return. Paradise will be restored. We will rise again to the heights our ancestors achieved. Or we will rise even higher, having learned from their mistakes. This hope is powerful. It sustains people through dark times. It provides direction, purpose, a vision of what we're working toward. But it's also dangerous, because it can become passive waiting. Instead of building a better world now, we wait for the prophesied return. Instead of solving problems, we expect divine intervention or spiritual evolution to solve them for us. The healthy version of this hope is different. It says, the golden age is not given. It's built. We build it. Through our choices, through our actions, through our commitment to wisdom and justice. Atlantis fell because the Atlanteans forgot this. They thought they had achieved permanent greatness. They stopped striving. They stopped questioning themselves. They assumed their power made them right. If we want to build a new Atlantis, and we should strive to create societies of justice, wisdom, beauty, and power used responsibly, then we cannot repeat their mistake. We must remain humble. Must remember we're fallible. Must design institutions that constrain our worst impulses and encourage our best. Must remain vigilant against decay. The new Atlantis won't be a recovered lost civilization. It will be something we create, consciously, deliberately, learning from history, learning from myth, building on the achievements of the past while avoiding its errors. This is the real treasure buried in the legend, not a physical city waiting to be discovered, but a template, a vision, a possibility we can make real through wisdom and effort. Where the waves meet the sky, we've traveled far. From Plato's original account to Renaissance dreams, to 19th century enthusiasm, to modern New Age mysticism. From underwater archaeology to geological catastrophes to the depths of the human psyche. What can we conclude? What remains after we've examined every angle? Atlantis probably never existed as Plato described it. No continent sank in the Atlantic. No civilization with technology beyond the Bronze Age perished 9,000 years before Plato. But something like Atlantis happened repeatedly throughout history. Advanced civilizations destroyed by natural disasters. The Minoans, Pompeii, the flood that filled the Black Sea, coastal cities drowned by rising seas as glaciers melted. These aren't Atlantis, but they echo Atlantis. They validate the pattern, and Atlantis definitely exists as mythology, as archetype, as the eternal pattern of rise and fall, pride and punishment, paradise and loss. This Atlantis is real. This Atlantis shapes how we think, how we understand history, how we envision possibilities. This Atlantis warns us, reminds us we're not exempt from consequences, calls us to examine ourselves, our civilizations, our choices. This Atlantis inspires us, shows us what we might achieve, challenges us to build societies worthy of the name. The search for Atlantis continues. Will always continue. Because the search isn't really for a lost island. It's for meaning, for connection, for hope, for the possibility that humanity can achieve greatness without succumbing to hubris. That we can build wisely. That we can learn from mistakes. That we can create something magnificent and make it last. Can we? Will we? The answer isn't written yet. The story isn't over. We're living in it. We're writing it. Every choice we make, every institution we build or allow to decay, every time we choose wisdom over expedience, justice over power, long-term flourishing over short-term gain. We are all Atlanteans now. We have power beyond what any previous civilization possessed. Technology that would seem like magic to our ancestors. The ability to reshape the planet itself. And we face the same question they faced. Will we use this power wisely? Will we maintain justice? Will we remember our limits? Or will we overreach? Grow corrupt? Forget what matters? The gods are watching. Or if you prefer, the laws of nature are operating. The consequences will come. They always do. The question is only what those consequences will be. Will they be nemesis? Destruction? The fall of our Atlantis? Or will they be flourishing? The rise of something better than what came before. The Golden Age not as a lost past, but as an achieved future. The choice is ours, has always been ours, will always be ours. The waves continue their eternal rhythm, rising and falling, building and destroying. And somewhere beneath them, perhaps, lie the ruins of civilizations that made the wrong choices, that forgot, that fell. And somewhere above them, perhaps, rises the possibility of civilizations that will make better choices, that will remember, that will endure. The story of Atlantis is not over. It's being written, right now, by us, by you. What will your chapter say? What will you build? What will you leave behind? These are the eternal questions. And Atlantis, lost, legendary, mythical Atlantis, continues to ask them. Rest now. Let your mind drift into sleep, into dreams, into the deep waters where all stories begin and end. Tomorrow you'll wake to continue the story, to be part of the answer, to build or to destroy, to remember or to forget, to rise or to fall. The choice is always before us. The possibility always present. The question always asked. Good night. Sleep well. Dream of golden cities, of rising civilizations, of wisdom preserved and lessons learned, of paradise not lost but built, not behind us but before us, not a memory but a promise, not what was but what could be. Good night. Until we meet again in the eternal now, where all stories exist at once, and all possibilities remain open, and all choices wait to be made. Good night.